And we're live. Welcome back to today's national weather forecast. There's a lot to talk about today. We've got a number of strengthening storm systems moving through the U.S. throughout this week. So there's some flood threats and severe weather threats going on throughout places like Oklahoma, Texas, down to Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, eventually moving up into the Midwest. We've also got these winter storm warnings where we're likely to get up to 6 inches, maybe even a foot of snow in places like Washington, Oregon, Colorado, and then eventually some snow up into Minnesota and parts of Michigan and Wisconsin. And then we also have some wildfire threats to talk about down here in Arizona, New Mexico, Texas. So as you can see, there's a lot to talk about. So if you're only interested in one of these stories, you can go down in the comments below where I put the timestamps for the different regions we're going to be talking about, and you could just click directly to the story or the region you're most interested in. But as you can see, there are a number of warnings on this page. This green color here represents where we have those flood threats due to the heavy rainfall that's expected throughout the southeast, stretching up into the Midwest with that first and second storm system. But before those move into the southeast, it's going to bring some snow into places like Colorado and New Mexico. Great to see that snow building into New Mexico because that's one of the places where there's extreme drought. But you can see that snow isn't extending all the way down into the state because that's where we have some red flag warning. So that's not getting that cold air and that snow. Instead, it's getting some dry air and some wind gusts up to 40 to 45 miles per hour. So that's why we have the wildfire threat down here in Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. But what happens to the eastern half of the country first happens to the west. So the storm over the center of the country right now already moved through Washington and Oregon yesterday and the day before. And as you can see, there appears to be a second one on the way following behind the storm that's over Colorado right now, which is creating these winter weather advisories up here in Washington, Oregon, Idaho, stretching down into Nevada as well. One thing you'll notice though is California, for the most part, looks like we're missing out on the precipitation for this storm. There are some times and locations that'll be getting a little bit of rain and snow, so we will check out where and when those will be taking place. So just looking at the precipitation, there's the first storm that we're going to be following. And actually, we're going to be following these storms together because they're basically doing the exact same track as they move across the country. So there's that first one, bringing that snow to Colorado, down to New Mexico. And then this is where we start to get some severe weather throughout places like Kansas, Oklahoma, into Texas. And then one thing you'll hear me talking about throughout this forecast today is down here in Louisiana and Mississippi. That's an area that's expected to get heavy rainfall almost this entire week. So there's actually some locations down there that could be getting 6 to 8 inches of rainfall. So that's one of the key places where there is that flood concern. So continue to watch as that low pressure system moves up into places like Minnesota and Wisconsin. That's where we actually get a little bit of snowfall in the upper Midwest, while the majority of the Midwest is in rainfall. And then as that storm was moving from the middle of the country, bringing that heavy rain to the southeast and then up into the Midwest, you'll notice what was going on the left side of your screen. That's where the next system is following in behind it, and it looks like it's doing almost the exact same thing as that first system. It comes through Washington and Oregon and Idaho, moves right down over Colorado and New Mexico, and then right about here, it starts bringing in some moisture from the Gulf of Mexico, and then bringing more heavy rain to the exact same places in Louisiana, Mississippi, and some select locations in Texas as well before it moves up into the Midwest. And this, as you can see, just based on this map, looks like the bigger of the two systems. Right there, I think if I had to say my reasoning for why this is the bigger, it looks like it just hangs out over Texas, Louisiana, and Mississippi for a number of days, which allows it to bring in more warm air, more moisture, more energy, and then it uses all that moisture and energy as it goes up into the Midwest and becomes what looks like it's going to be a rather strong storm towards Thursday and Friday. So we're definitely going to be diving into the Midwest as that storm strengthens and brings what will likely be some severe weather and thunderstorms to places like Illinois, Indiana, and Michigan. And then on the back end of that, You think right there, that's where you're bringing that cold air down. Looks like there's a chance of snow for Michigan as another system looks to be going into Colorado. So to sum up, lots going on in the weather throughout this week. I'm going to try to include it all throughout this forecast today. So to see that another way, sometimes this is the easier way to actually see it. There's that system. You can see this trough right here. That's what's causing that snow over Colorado right now. And then you can see it's going to actually start to strengthen as it goes over Oklahoma and Texas. That's what's causing the severe weather there. And then it moves up what looks to be almost directly over Minnesota and Wisconsin. Now on the back end of that, you see this other trough moving through Washington and Oregon, actually right now. It even started last night, and that one is going to dip down. You can see it does look like it grazes SoCal for a second there. So if you're in SoCal, you'll be happy to hear it looks like there are some opportunities for some rainfall throughout this week. We'll go over those when we get to the local parts of this forecast. But first, I want to just show how that system really digs all the way down into Texas, which goes along with the idea that it's strengthening, it's pulling farther down, it's a little bit slower, and it's bringing in all of that moisture. And you'll notice how close those isobars are together. That means there's going to be some stronger winds to pull in that warm air and moisture. Then as that moves up into the Midwest, you can see while the first one moved directly over Minnesota and Wisconsin, the second one looks like it moves more right over Michigan and places like Ohio. So that, I believe, is the bigger of the two systems. And then behind all that, as we get into this next weekend, it looks like there is a major ridge that builds over the west, which goes along with those extended range climate forecasts that say California up into Oregon in the extended forecast are going to be extremely dry. If we have time at the end of the video, I'll go over the climate forecast to unfortunately show that California is expected to be dry 6 days out to 14 days out, and even in the extended 3-month forecast as well. So just looking at what these storms do and where it drops all that precipitation as it goes through, you'll notice the two different ones that we're talking about. There's the one that's already over the center of the country, and then there's the new one that's just pushing in from the Pacific Northwest. So as we click through here, you'll notice that first one brings some heavy rainfall throughout Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas. Especially in Oklahoma and Texas, that's where it's going to be associated with some severe weather, where there's the chance of thunderstorms, some hail, hopefully not any tornadoes. We got enough of that last week. And then that is going to move up into the Midwest. And you notice mostly up here in places like Iowa, Wisconsin, and Minnesota, while Louisiana and Mississippi are picking up a large amount of rainfall. And then that's actually going to continue and get worse when that second system pushes down from the Pacific Northwest. That's going to bring some heavy rain to the exact same places in the southeast here before moving up into the Midwest, where it looks to be going directly into Michigan. So that, I think, is the key place to look at when it comes to the precipitation map here. Louisiana and Mississippi expecting to get, in some places, maybe even 6 to 8 inches of rain. So that's our key concern when it comes to the flooding. Although you see that the Washington and Oregon coast looks like they'll be picking up over 1 inch or 2 inches of rain as well as that system moves through. California, though, for the most part, staying dry. It looks like we're under a shield of protection from that ridge that's just moving these storms right out of our reach, although you do see some rain building into SoCal there, which is good to see because that's an area that is abnormally dry. So looking at the snowfall, there's that snow building in through the Pacific Northwest. You can see Cascades getting maybe a foot, maybe even more than a foot of snow. We're going to dive into Washington especially. And then that other system that starts in Colorado moves up into Minnesota, bringing up to 6 to 8 inches of snow in Colorado, and then maybe 4 to 6 inches up here in Minnesota and the upper parts of Michigan, possibly. You also see some snow building down here into New Mexico and Arizona. That's great news because, again, that is one of our areas that is in extreme drought. So then that next one, you'll see on the very back end of it, that's where right now looks like as that storm goes up into the Midwest, it has the potential to bring some snowfall to Michigan. Although, we'll see about that one because that's a ways off in the forecast, and models typically aren't too great at predicting snowfall more than 3 days out. So that might even be the last time I mention that snowfall, because that's something we'll just have to follow throughout this entire week. But just looking at this again, notice for much of the west, there are numerous locations getting at least a foot of snow over the next week as both of those systems move through, and especially here in Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico, and then the Cascades of Washington and Oregon. So another big part of the story is what's going on with the winds as these two systems move through, where you're not getting the snowfall and the rain, you're just getting the extreme winds and actually some dry air, which is causing that wildfire threat down there in Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. This, I think, explains it more than anything else why we have that wildfire threat. Throughout much of the rest of the country, winds are not too extreme. There are some places where we're getting up to 20, 30 mile per hour gusts in the Northwest and the Midwest, but down here in New Mexico and Texas, that's where we're getting these gusts over 50 to 60 miles per hour. So that's why we have that wildfire threat going on down there with that red flag warning, where you see 50 to 60 mile per hour gusts there, and that's going to be combined with some very dry air that I'll show later in this video. When it comes to the temperature anomalies, we have those two systems that are moving through and then moving straight up into the Midwest. So what that's doing is on the back end, it's bringing a lot of that cold air down into much of the western half of the country, where in many parts of this graph or this map, whatever you want to call it, you see these temperatures 10 to 15, even 20 degrees below average, while on the right side of these lows, where you think the winds will be pushing up from the southeast, that's where we're getting some well above average temperatures. And that's certainly going to be the case as we get into this afternoon. There's some portions of the Midwest and Northeast that are 20 to 30 degrees above average. And then that appears to be the case throughout much of this week, and that makes sense. The lows come down here. As they move down, they bring down some of that cold air from Canada into places like Colorado, Arizona, and New Mexico. Again, good for the wildfire threat if we can really bring some of those 20 to 25 degree below average temperatures all the way down here into New Mexico. But then on the right side, as those lows move up, you think that's where they're going to start bringing some warm air up from the Gulf of Mexico. So that's where we get these 10 to 25 degree above average temperatures in the eastern half of the country. So these two low pressure systems really having a large effect on not only our precipitation, not only our winds, but our temperatures as well. That's what I love about weather. It's almost always all connected in some kind of way, and also what happens in the west eventually affects what happens in the east. For example, the winter storm advisories that we see here bringing some snowfall to the Cascades in Washington and Oregon, eventually those are going to be bringing snow to Colorado and then some heavy rain down here to Louisiana and Mississippi before moving up and possibly bringing snowfall to places like Michigan. So that's what we're going to try to be following throughout this video, and then every single forecast that I do throughout this week. So just looking at this warnings map again, there's a lot going on. Those winter weather advisories in Washington and Oregon, the high wind warnings in California that we'll look at, the critical threat for wildfire throughout Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas, winter storm warnings in Colorado and New Mexico, and then those flood warnings in the southeast stretching all the way up into the Midwest. So it's going to be rather difficult to cover all of this, but we'll give it our best shot. And I think a good place to start is with the main story that's happening right now, which is that winter storm warning here in Colorado. So you can see that's where there is some snow building in right there as that low pressure system moves down over Texas and Oklahoma. So as it continues to move down, that's where it's going to start to refuel some of its moisture from the Gulf of Mexico and bring some of that severe weather to places like Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas before eventually moving into the southeast and then eventually up into the Midwest. And then you see on the back end of that one, as that one is moving up into the Midwest, the second storm moves into this exact same region and brings more snow to Colorado and New Mexico before that moves into the southeast as well, possibly bringing some more severe weather into Texas. So we'll try to follow both those storms as they move through this region especially. Then we'll go into the southeast, then we'll go into the Midwest, and then we'll go back to the west to see where it all came from. So with this first one, there's that trough building down into Colorado and New Mexico. And right there you can see those tight isobars. That explains why we have those extreme winds causing that wildfire threat. Before that one moves directly over Oklahoma and Texas. Looks like it strengthens right there before it moves up into the Midwest. Then the second one drops down, almost looking a very similar pattern to the first one, but actually looks like it digs down even deeper, which is going to allow it to pick up even more moisture from the Pacific as it starts to funnel in over from Mexico. And then as it gets over really Missouri and Arkansas, that's where it's going to start building in some moisture from the Gulf of Mexico before going up into the Midwest. So two systems doing relatively similar things. The area we're focused on first is right here. Especially keep your eye on Colorado, Kansas, Oklahoma, and northern Texas here. In Colorado, the main story is that snowfall that's building in with that first system. And then as that continues to move out, that's where we start to get that severe weather throughout Oklahoma and Texas as we get into this afternoon, this evening, and then into Tuesday as well, before that brings some possible thunderstorms to Missouri and then finally moves out into the Midwest. Can't get too comfortable after that one leaves though, because as you can see, the next one is already following behind it just as that one is leaving. We already start to see some of that snowfall building into Colorado and New Mexico as this second system digs down even deeper. You can see how deep it's digging down there because it starts to bring that heavy snow to New Mexico, which really signifies that it's going to be bringing that cold air all the way down into some of the more southern locations of the country. Now, on the second part of that system, as it digs further down, then as it comes up, it's going to bring some of that Gulf of Mexico moisture in and then cause what looks to be even more severe weather through Oklahoma, Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, and Missouri before that one goes up into the Midwest. So just clicking back through those if you missed it. The first one looks like there's some severe weather, looks like there's some snowfall, but that one, there's going to be some severe weather, but it doesn't look all that extreme. It looks like I'd say average storm that comes down here. This second one looks like it's going to be a bit more out of the ordinary, especially with all that heavy snow going down into New Mexico, and then how strong some of that severe weather is going to be as we get into Thursday and Friday as it collects all that moisture from the Gulf of Mexico and then moves up through this region into the Midwest. And then it looks like there might actually be another system behind that this weekend, but that's a ways off in the forecast, and there's certainly enough to talk about already, so we're just going to ignore that for now. We'll follow that as we get later in the week and the models get more accurate there. So just clicking through to see, we'll just go all the way into Friday to see the combination of both these systems. You can ignore Colorado and New Mexico for now. That's mostly going to be where we're getting snowfall, which I'll show in a second. What you want to keep your eye on is where we're getting that heavy rainfall in this region. You can see there's places of Kansas getting up to 2 to 3 inches of rain. Same story for parts of Missouri, Arkansas, stretching down into Oklahoma and Texas as well. Anywhere you see that red color, that's where we're expecting over 2 to 3 inches of rain, which explains why there's some of those scattered flood warnings throughout this area. And then when it comes to the snowfall, you can see that's mostly going to be through Colorado, stretching into the northwestern parts of Kansas, and then into Nebraska with that first system. Looks like for the most part, that one's 4 to 6 inches of snow. The second one, like I said, looks to be the stronger of the two systems. That's where some of our totals, especially in Colorado and select locations in New Mexico, can actually get up to a foot of snow by Friday night. So I would say there's some key places to look out for in this region. Obviously, there's numerous locations where that heavy rainfall is building in, But I think the biggest part of the story is going to be that severe weather that's going into Oklahoma and Texas. So let's try to see exactly what timing that will be. It looks like about 7 p.m. tonight is where, and it might even start a little bit earlier. You start to see these possible thunderstorms popping up in Texas around 1 p.m. today, and then that'll actually start to strengthen as we get into this evening. It strengthens because now it's picking up some more moisture and some warm air from the Gulf of Mexico. So 1 p.m. to 7 p.m. today, that's where we're expecting some of that severe weather and even getting into the overnight hours as you see some of those thunderstorms continue before that system finally moves out. But again, you can't think we're in the clear for too long because there's a system right behind that one which is bringing more severe weather. So it's interesting to see this because it almost digs down underneath this map that we're looking at right now. It first comes in bringing that snowfall to some northwestern parts of Texas, and then it almost looks like it disappears for a second, but it's actually just digging farther and farther south, and then you see it pop right back up again around 1 p.m. on Thursday, where we have what I think is some of the most severe weather that we're looking at for this entire week. About 1 p.m. on Thursday, before that finally moves out of the region there. So just seeing some of the accumulated precip. Again, I don't think the accumulated precip is the big part of the story for this location. I think the big part of the story is going to be that severe weather aspect where we have some strong winds, possibly some hail, hopefully not any tornadoes. Like I said, we got enough of that last week. So we got enough of that for all time, frankly. So looking at Oklahoma and Texas, though, there is that area where we're getting 2 to 3 inches of rain. So that is one location where if you're living in this area, you may want to stay updated with local resources to see if there are any flood concerns. Now, that was the big story when it comes to the severe weather with this storm. I think the big story when it comes to the snowfall and that winter storm warning is here in Colorado. And you can see that snowfall was already starting as early as 12 a.m. this morning, and it's been continuing throughout the day today, and it will continue in select areas till about 6 p.m. tonight before, for the most part, it's gone by tomorrow morning. One thing you'll notice there, looks like the bulk of it already came in, and then we just have some light scattered snow throughout the day today. And then right, just like with that severe weather, right when you think you might be in the clear, the next system follows in behind it. Looks like it first comes in about 12 p.m. on Tuesday, then especially down here in the southwestern part of the state, 6 p.m. on Tuesday. And then that's going to spread out, getting into Tuesday night and then into Wednesday morning, where we continue to pick up some light snowfall. Again, there's no periods of this storm where we're seeing this purple color down here like what we saw with Winter Storm Xylea. It looks like light, moderate snow, but it's for a long period of time, all the way into Wednesday and Thursday. So that's where some of our totals are actually going to end up being rather large throughout this area. So with that first system, let's actually just go back to look at what that first system's bringing. Looks like there's areas where it's 2 to 5 inches of snow. Colorado Springs, about 4 inches. Denver, about 3.5 inches. Then with that second system, we're going to pile onto those totals, and that's where, especially down here in the southwestern parts of the state where you saw some of that more moderate snowfall coming in, that's where some of these locations could be getting up over a foot, while anywhere you see this purple color, that's where you're getting at least 6 to 8 inches. Now, the other part of this, you can actually see it on this map, some of those purple colors where we have that heavier snowfall stretching all the way down into New Mexico, and especially with that second system, because remember, that's the one that digs all the way down. So let's see what exactly happens and when this snowfall is going to be building into New Mexico. It looks like there is already some snowfall building in early this morning into northeastern parts of the state. That's continuing throughout 12 p.m. today, and then by about 6 p.m. today, looks like that snowfall is, for the most part, gone from New Mexico. That isn't the big story for this region. The big story is that second system. As it comes through, looks like we might get the first little traces of snow about 12 p.m. on Tuesday, and then continues into 6 p.m. on Tuesday, into 12 a.m. Wednesday, and then actually continues to strengthen all the way into 6 a.m. on Wednesday. That's where we start getting some of the heavier snow we're going to see throughout the entire country throughout this week, building down here into New Mexico. So I think the bulk of that storm looks to be about 6 a.m. Wednesday into 12 p.m. Wednesday before that one finally moves out of the region. So if we look at the total accumulated snowfall, that is with the first storm. Like I said, it's rather quick, it's rather late. Some locations could be getting 2 to 4 inches, but that's not the big story in this region. The big story is when that second one comes through, and you can see there's large portions of the state, almost the entire upper half of the state is getting at least 2 to 4 inches, and then where you have that purple color, that's where we're getting maybe 6 to 8 inches, and then that dark red color, that's where you could be getting 12 to 16 inches of snow down here in New Mexico. One thing you'll notice though, southern parts of the state appear to be missing out. And there's really some good news and bad news when it comes to this snow. The good news is that's a rather large amount of snowfall, and that's going to certainly help with this extreme drought that we have in New Mexico. That's one of the areas of the country that is currently in the worst drought. But the bad news is you notice it's not stretching all the way down into the southern part of the state where, one, we also have that drought, but even more importantly, that's where we have this threat for wildfire. That's where that red flag warning is in place, and you'll notice it almost perfectly follows where we're not getting that snowfall. So to explain this wildfire threat, and you'll notice it's actually stretching all the way down into Texas as well, and actually this part of Texas may be even in worse wildfire danger than majority of New Mexico. So to explain that, we can look at the 3 most important variables when it comes to wildfire danger: temperature, winds, and humidity. Temperature makes sense. The warmer it is, the worse wildfire is going to be. The drier it is, the lower your humidity, the drier it's going to be, which makes sense. If the air is dry, the vegetation gets dry, and then there's more risk for wildfire. But I think even the biggest aspect of any kind of wildfire forecast is what the winds are doing. When you have strong wind gusts that can not only fan oxygen into your fire, it can actually spread the fire faster just from pushing the flames or starting little spot fires. So if you've ever watched one of my wildfire forecast videos, it's always, excuse me, I'm going to take a quick sip of water. About 30 minutes in, usually need a little sip of water right there. So continuing with this wildfire threat. A little tickle. All right. So temperature, winds, and humidity. So that is the low pressure system moving through New Mexico and Texas. And just looking at the temperature aspect first, it's actually not that warm throughout these locations. As you get into Texas, there's some areas where you're getting that red color, where you're in the high 60s, maybe 70s, even 80s in some places. But up here in New Mexico, even into this afternoon, we're in the mid 50s to mid 60s. It's certainly warm, but nothing like the 70 to 80 to 90 degrees that we typically can see in this area. So temperature, especially with that system as it comes through, doesn't seem to be what's causing this wildfire threat. So we can also check out humidity to see what's going on there, and this starts to paint a better picture of why this wildfire threat is in place. See that low pressure system there? As winds flow into the low, you're going to be bringing all this dry air from Arizona into New Mexico and into Texas, as you can see that wind just flowing directly into that low. So while the temperature certainly doesn't ring any alarm bells because we're just in the mid 50s to 60s, some of that dry air being pulled into this low certainly does bring some alarm bells, because you can see parts of this dry air are going to be in the single digits. So that's going to dry out a lot of the vegetation and again, make it easier for a wildfire to start. So temperature, not the key culprit. Dry air certainly seems to be a major factor here, as some of our humidities are in the single digits and teens due to that dry air being pulled from Arizona through New Mexico and into Texas as it reaches that low pressure system there. Now, the final factor, which I believe is actually the most important factor, is what's going on with the wind gust. You can see those winds flowing into the low are rather strong. Clicking in there, that's showing a 52 mile per hour wind gust. And in some locations, especially like drainages and canyons, some of those winds are going to be even stronger than that, maybe even getting up to 60 miles per hour. So we're mixing these 50 to 60 mile per hour wind gusts with these 10 to even single digit relative humidities. So that's a pretty good indication that there's some wildfire danger in place in that area. So if we look at the actual fire danger class put forward by the NFDRS, you can see down here through New Mexico and especially there in Texas, that's where we have the very high to extreme fire danger. So again, that's mostly due to the low relative humidities and those extreme wind gusts in that area, and explains why we have that red flag warning in place. So let's continue to follow this storm as it moves across the country, and actually follow both storms as they move across the country, because like I said earlier, they're moving through similar regions. That first one, we've already followed it as it goes through Colorado, New Mexico, Oklahoma, Texas. Now, I want you to keep your eye on especially Louisiana and Mississippi here. It looks like even as early as tonight into early tomorrow morning, we start to see some of that severe weather pop up in this region where we get some of those heavier rainfall rates. And then watch as that same area just continues to see that heavy rainfall all the way into Wednesday, into Thursday. And then as the next system drops down, it's actually going to strengthen and become what looks to be one of the key weather stories we're going to have to follow throughout this entire week, as Thursday afternoon we see this heavy rainfall building into Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, parts of Arkansas, and then eventually up into Tennessee and Missouri. So the reason I wanted to emphasize Louisiana and Mississippi here is because they're going to start getting some heavy rainfall, maybe even as early as tonight, and then they're going to continue to get that heavy rainfall all the way into the next system, and then even into Friday before that system's finally gone. So what that can do is really pile on that rain, accumulate within your soils, completely saturate them. So then when it really starts to pick up right about Thursday afternoon, your soils aren't going to be able to absorb any more water because it's already been picking up rain for a week. And that's where I think we'll start to see some flood warnings popping up. So that's, I think, one of the key things we're going to be following throughout this week. If you want to see that another way, there's that first storm that comes through, and you'll notice the flow is right over Louisiana and Mississippi, bringing in that moisture from the Gulf of Mexico. Then there's no change in the pattern in this area. It looks like we're constantly just bringing in that moisture into Louisiana and Mississippi until the second system comes through, and you'll notice looks to be the stronger of the two. You can see it's the stronger of the two because those lines you see there, the isobars, the lines of constant pressure, appear to be closer together. So what that means when it comes to our rainfall is that the winds are going to be stronger, which means we'll be pushing in more warm air and moisture, which again is the recipe for some severe weather and heavy rainfall. So you'll notice it starts what looks to be maybe even tonight into early tomorrow morning, where we start to see that heavy rainfall building into Louisiana and then stretching out into Mississippi and Alabama as we get into Tuesday night and into Wednesday morning. What you'll notice here is even after that low is gone though, we continue to pick up heavy rain, especially down here in Louisiana, Mississippi, and select locations in Alabama. That just continues and continues what appears to be all week long until the next system comes in and then brings even more severe weather that looks to be even more widespread. Again, that second system appears to be the stronger of the two, and it's expected to bring that severe weather to Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama as we get into Thursday, and then by about Thursday night, it looks like it's moving across the southeast and then eventually out of the region. So as I click through here, you'll notice, especially down here in Louisiana and Mississippi, almost every time I click this map, we're just going to continue to add on totals. So we're not only getting heavy rainfall, but it's heavy rainfall for a long period of time, especially down here in Louisiana and Mississippi. Every time I click, we just add more and more rain all the way into Friday and Saturday when that system's finally gone. So looking across the region, you can see, especially down here in the eastern parts of Louisiana, that's where we have some totals getting up to 6 to 8 inches, getting up to 5 to 6 inches here in Mississippi as well, while Alabama is more in the 1 to 3 inch range, and then Georgia is more in the 0 to 1.5 inch range. So that right there is the key place that we want to look at. But before we actually look at the local timing and totals, let's just take a quick look at this map because it perfectly explains what's going on here. You see that low pressure system that's moving through Texas and Oklahoma today. We've already talked about that. It's bringing the snow to Colorado, the possible severe weather to Oklahoma and Texas. But what it's doing down in this region that we're now diving into in Louisiana and Mississippi is it's bringing that moisture in. So it's bringing the warm air in from the Gulf of Mexico, but it's also bringing that moisture. You can actually see that better if I click on humidity, where you can see that brown color, that's where it's dry air. That's what's causing our wildfire threat. But over Louisiana and Mississippi, that's where it's streaming in this moisture. And you'll notice that is actually just going to continue all the way into Tuesday, into Wednesday, into Thursday. There's no break of that moisture being pushed into this region. And then you'll notice once that next low pressure system builds down all the way down into Texas here, as that moves through, we start to see these winds pick up. And that's where we're going to have the most severe weather, because you can see that's where we're going to be pushing in the most moisture until that low is finally gone. So let's look at the exact timing that we see in Louisiana here. Looks like some light rain will be starting as early as 1 p.m. into 7 p.m. tonight. That's not the strong part of the storm. We start to get some heavy rain as we get into the overnight hours, and into 7 a.m. tomorrow morning, we start to see some of that severe weather, possibly some thunderstorms showing up in Louisiana. Now, keep in mind how long this stays over eastern parts of Louisiana. Looks like New Orleans right there is covered in that heavy rainfall throughout. Let's see, the first one comes in 7 a.m. Tuesday. We're still getting heavy rainfall throughout Wednesday, throughout Thursday. This is now 1 a.m. on Thursday. That heavy rainfall still over this exact same region. And then it actually looks like it strengthens 1 p.m. Thursday before finally moving out. So just clicking through that again, there's just a long period of time where we're continuing to see that heavy rainfall and most likely that severe weather. So if we look at the total accumulated precip, the key spot to look out for is that eastern part of Louisiana where we saw that continual severe weather and possible thunderstorms and that heavy rainfall rates. That's where we're looking at over 7 to 8 inches of rain over the next week. So again, that is one of the key places that I'm going to be keeping my eye on when it comes to that flood concern, because that is a lot of rain to get, 7 to possibly even 9 inches in some places. And again, it's just because it's heavy rainfall that's happening almost this entire week. So those totals are really going to start to build up. Then as we look at Mississippi, that's the other part of the story where we're getting that heavy rainfall. Looks to be, the light rain looks to be starting about 1 a.m. on Tuesday into 7 a.m. on Tuesday. This storm's moving from west to east, so it makes sense that it starts for Louisiana before it starts for Mississippi. Then we have the possibility for some of those thunderstorms and some severe weather as we get into Tuesday afternoon before that system moves out. But again, we continue to get that heavy rainfall, and especially in the southern parts of the state. That's continuing into, again, all the way into 1 a.m. on Thursday, and then 7 a.m. on Thursday. Mississippi appears to be just in the bullseye of this storm as we get most likely some thunderstorms, possibly some hail, hopefully not any tornadoes, throughout Thursday, into Thursday afternoon, into Thursday night, before that system moves off into Alabama on about 1 a.m. on Friday. As it goes through Alabama, that's going to be a much quicker mover. So that's why the totals in Alabama aren't as large. In Mississippi, we're adding on to these totals for a number of days. In Alabama, that heavy rainfall moves through a lot faster. So let's just look at some of that rainfall that's going to be building up in Mississippi. We'll just click all the way through, see what we've gotten by about Friday night into Saturday morning. Again, right where we saw those heaviest rainfall rates for the longest period of time, that's where there's some locations in Mississippi where we're getting over 5 to 6, maybe even 7 to 8 inches of rain, especially where you see those darker yellow to orangish colors there. And then again in Alabama, we do get some of that heavy rain and some of that severe weather, but it's for a quicker period of time. So that's where our totals are around 1 to 3.5 inches. Again, the key spot to look out for is down here in southern Mississippi, where that is a lot of rain to be picking up over just a number of days. So following these storms again, the first one comes through, brings that severe weather into the southeast, and then eventually moves up into the Midwest. And right there you see the bulk of it looks to be going up into places like Minnesota and Wisconsin. Meanwhile, that second system is following behind it. That's going to bring in even more moisture from the Gulf of Mexico. And then that one is going to move up into the Midwest as well. And you can see that actually looks to be the bigger and the stronger of the two systems as it pulls in that moisture right there over Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, brings that extreme severe weather and heavy rainfall throughout Arkansas, Missouri, Tennessee, Kentucky, before eventually moving up into the Midwest, where it almost looks like it gets even stronger, where those isobars get even closer together, and we get some of that heavy rain building into Illinois, Indiana, and Michigan. So while the first one looks like it goes, we'll just start back over. While the first one looks like it goes mostly into Minnesota and Wisconsin, the second one looks like it goes mostly through Indiana, Illinois, and Michigan. So just looking at that another way, there's the first one collecting some moisture and then moving up into Minnesota and Wisconsin. The second one digs down even deeper, is able to get even more moisture and energy, and then moves directly over Illinois, Indiana, and Michigan. And you can see that looks to be the stronger of the two systems as those lines of constant pressure are rather close together. I imagine there's going to be some extreme winds associated with this storm as well as we get into Thursday and Friday. So looking at the more regional precipitation, some of that light rain is already going to be starting as we get into this afternoon and this evening, especially in places like Iowa, working into Minnesota and Wisconsin, just showing up as some widespread light rain, maybe some isolated thunderstorms moving through here, but that one doesn't look like all that strong of a storm. It looks like it's more spread out, and you notice there are some times where we're getting some snow up here in Minnesota and Wisconsin. So that one moves out. Again, widespread light impacts, I would say. The second one is a much different story. That one looks to be rather intense. So you can see that is a large period of, or a large region of where we're getting that heavy rainfall, stretching in especially over Illinois and Indiana. And this one looks like a rather strong storm, especially with how tight those isobars are. That's most likely going to be associated with some extreme winds. But even if there aren't winds, which there are going to be some extreme winds, you can see that is some heavy rainfall stretching through Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, and then even some ice building into Wisconsin. And then on the back end of that, getting into Friday and Saturday, looks like there might be a snowfall chance for Michigan. I'm purposely not going to spend too much time on that today because that's a ways off in the forecast, and I guarantee those impacts will change. So looking at this low pressure system, as it moves up, one thing you'll notice is that for both of these systems, it's mostly rainfall that we're getting. So as that first one goes up, you can see as it's over Iowa at that point, going into Wisconsin, the majority of the Midwest is in the low to mid 50s, and that's just 2 in the morning. So as we're getting into the afternoon hours, that's where the low is directly over Wisconsin. Much of the Midwest is in the 60s to possibly even the high 60s and even 70s in some locations, which explains why we're getting mostly rainfall with that. Now, where we are bringing down some of that cold air is on the left side of that low, where you see those counterclockwise winds bringing some of that cold air down into Minnesota and Wisconsin, which explains why those regions are actually able to pick up a little bit of snow as that low moves through. Then as the second one moves through, let's see if we can track it. That's the one that looks to be going more directly over Illinois and Indiana. Let's see if the map decides to respond here. It looks like it's going pretty slowly, which makes sense because I have about 60 tabs open, but that's a good place to possibly pause. You can see that low over Indiana. Remember, that's right where it's bringing the strongest rainfall, especially over Illinois, Indiana, and then into Michigan. And that's where it is bringing some cold air down into Minnesota and Wisconsin, but the majority of that precip is directly over this low. And I paused there for a second because I thought this would be a good chance to look at the kind of wind gusts we're getting with this second storm that's moving through Thursday and Friday. And just as we figured, that has some extreme wind gusts associated with it. That's over 60 mile per hour wind gusts, and that was just a random click right there. That means there's most likely some regions that are getting into hurricane force winds as that second low moves through going into Thursday and Friday. So that is certainly the bigger of the two storms because we're going to have some possibly hurricane force winds associated with that heavy rainfall, severe weather that we've already been looking at. So overall, when it comes to the accumulated precip, with that first one, we'll look at the snowfall because the first one, I think the bigger story is the snowfall building into Minnesota and parts of Wisconsin. But then with the second one, as it brings in that heavy rainfall, you can see Illinois is the key spot to look at there where we're getting 2 to 4 inches of rain. So that's where we're most likely going to have some flood concerns in that region. When it comes to the snowfall, you can see the first bit goes up into Minnesota and Wisconsin there, where there are some locations that could get 3 to 6 inches of snow. And then with the second one, that's where it looks like we're going to have this bullseye of snow going into Michigan where 6 to 8 inches are possible. Purposely not spending too much time on that today though, because that's all the way into Friday and Saturday, and I guarantee that snowfall forecast will change. So we'll just have to stay updated with that as it does. So with the first system that goes through, let's check out the timing. Looks like it's bringing, for the most part, moderate to some isolated heavy rainfall, especially to parts of Illinois throughout 1 p.m. to 7 p.m. on Tuesday before that one's gone. So you notice that one, we do get some periods of heavy rainfall, possibly some thunderstorms, but that's not much when you compare it to this second system that comes through. It looks like about 7 p.m. on Thursday, we start to get that more moderate rainfall building in, and then by 1 a.m. on Friday, the storm has arrived. That's where we're bringing in 0.2 to 0.5 inches of rainfall per hour. There's the chance for severe weather, maybe some hail, and certainly the wind factor is going to be something we're talking about this week, as we saw possibly even some hurricane force winds building in as that storm moves through. So the exact timing of when that second one is strongest, because again, that's the key thing to look at in this region, looks to be about 1 a.m. on Friday to about 7 a.m. on Friday. That's where we get that just bullseye of severe weather moving through Illinois and then up eventually into Michigan. And you will notice there's actually a period about 7 a.m. on Friday morning where we're actually getting some ice into Wisconsin as well. So that'll be another factor of the story that we'll be following throughout this week. Looking at the accumulated precip one more time, you can see with that first system, that's where we're maybe half an inch to an inch of rain. And then when that second system comes through, that's where some of our totals get up to 2 to 4 inches of rain, especially through Illinois and Indiana, picking up maybe 1 to 2 inches as well. So looking at that snowfall that's going to be coming in, that bullseye that we saw in Minnesota and Wisconsin, you notice at first it comes in as rain till about 7 p.m. on Tuesday, and that's because that cold air hasn't been able to be pulled down yet. Once that cold air does pull down, that's where we start to get some snowfall as we get into early Wednesday morning, about 1 a.m. on Wednesday, into about 7 a.m. on Wednesday, even into 1 p.m. Wednesday, where you think about it, there's the low pressure. It has counterclockwise winds around it. So up here, we're pulling some of that cold air down from Canada, which is allowing some of that precipitation to fall as snow. and then that's going to be gone by about 1 a.m. on Thursday. So just looking at the time in there, it looks like snow starts 1 a.m. Wednesday, and then it's gone by 1 a.m. Thursday. So looking at the totals in this region, we'll just click all the way through. Looks like for the most part, northeastern parts of Minnesota, very northern parts of Wisconsin, could be getting 2 to 5 inches of snowfall with this, with that bullseye up in the very northern parts of the state where we're pulling down the most cold air. That's where we could be getting 6 to 8, maybe even 10 inches of snow. Although I'd say the safe bet is to say 6 inches, because that first storm really doesn't look like it's, maybe I don't think it looks that strong just because I'm comparing it with that second one that looks very strong, the one that's coming in Thursday and Friday. So there was one location here in Wisconsin that looks like it does get some snowfall as that second one goes through, although that's just going to add about an inch or two to your totals up there. So again, when it comes to snowfall, bullseye is up here in Minnesota, where there is the possibility of 6 to 8 inches of snow. So that is certainly going to be a storm that we're following throughout this week, because again, as that second one builds in, that is going to be what looks to be a rather severe storm. So we're going to be following that one closely really throughout this entire week. But it's interesting to see where that storm comes from in the first place. And as it turns out, it's already arrived. It's already bringing some rain and snow up here to Washington and Oregon. And then that's the same exact storm that's spreading all the way down here into Texas before picking up that moisture and eventually moving up into the Midwest. So it's interesting to see where the storm comes from and what it's going to do as it moves into the Pacific Northwest. Looks like it's going to bring widespread snow to much of the Northwest and even the Southeast as well. Although, as you'll see, California appears to be missing out. So with that first system, the one moving through today, it does look like it stretches all the way down into Southern California. So it'll be interesting to see if we're actually able to pick up any rainfall throughout the day today as the very tail of that trough moves through SoCal. But then you'll notice as the next system moves through, you'll see it's this trough up here in Washington and Oregon. That one is just going to graze California. And then that one, the tail of it appears to be stretching down into SoCal. So again, we're going to have to see if we're getting any precipitation down in Southern California. But the guarantee is where that trough is widespread over Washington, Oregon, Idaho, through Nevada, Utah, and then all the way down into Arizona, where it looks like it's actually going to start to strengthen. At this point, it's bringing in some moisture from off the coast of Mexico. So that's where we're actually going to be picking up some snowfall throughout the Southwest, which is always great news, especially when it comes to the drought. So let's check out the exact timing of this storm. Turns out it's already begun bringing some rain and snowfall to the coast, some rain to the coast of Washington and Oregon, and then widespread snowfall throughout the Cascades, working into Idaho, Montana, Nevada, even Utah as well. Before that, moves out of the region. And then it looks like as we get into Wednesday morning, there appears to be another storm coming in that looks to be getting even stronger snowfall rates, especially through the Cascades in Washington, before that one spreads out across the entire region. So it almost looks like both of these storms are doing the exact same thing. We'll go back to the start here. That one moves through Washington and Oregon, spreads out snow throughout the region, but for the most part, it looks like it's dodging Northern California. Then the next one comes in Wednesday, spreads widespread snow throughout the region, but for the most part, looks like it's dodging California. So that's going to be one of the key things that we're looking at with this storm. But also, it's important to look at where that rainfall is building in. Again, along the coast of Washington and Oregon, that's where we're getting an inch, maybe 2.5 inches of rainfall. When it comes to the snowfall, again, that's going to be widespread throughout almost the entire Pacific Northwest. So just going through both of these systems as they move through, Cascades are the first thing that draws my attention. Looks like there's some regions getting over a foot of snow throughout Washington and Oregon. And then in the Olympic Mountains, looks like we're getting over a foot as well. Some select locations in Idaho looks like they could get up to that foot range. Well, again, there's just a widespread area that's getting at least 2 to 4 inches with this one. And then wherever you see that purple color, that's where we're in that 6 to 8 inch range. So I think to sum up the snowfall with this one, it is just very widespread unless you're here in California. So just diving into where that snowfall looked the strongest, we'll see where the strongest parts of the storms are going to be. It looks like the strongest part of that first storm was 11 p.m. last night. Then we're just continuing to add on to our totals throughout the day today, continuing to get some light snow before it looks like we're in the clear for most of Tuesday. Where that second storm appears to move in is about 5 a.m. on Wednesday, and then that looks to be actually the stronger of the two. That starts to bring some snowfall rates over 0.1 to 0.2 inches per hour, especially here into the Cascades of Washington, continuing until about 11 a.m. on Thursday. The bulk of that one looks to be about 11 a.m. on Wednesday when that second system moves through and is the strongest. Looking at the more local view of the totals with this storm, we'll just take a look at the first one first. Looks like throughout the Cascades with that first storm, maybe 6 to 8 inches. And then when you add on the totals from the second storm, that's where we get up over 12 inches, possibly even 1.5 feet throughout the Cascades and into the Olympic Mountains as well. So that's why we have those winter storm advisories and watches in effect. I'm guessing those will turn into winter storm warnings, especially here in Washington, as we get closer to that stronger storm coming in on Wednesday that will bring our totals up over a foot. So it's also interesting to see what's going on down here in the Southwest, because there's a whole mix of things. We do have those winter weather advisories here in Nevada. That's where we're getting some snowfall. And then we also have some heavy winds building into southern Nevada and California as well. So one of the key things I was curious of is, why is California not getting this precipitation? And are there any periods where we are getting precipitation? Because especially with the first one, it looks like the tail does stretch into SoCal. And then as we watch that overall trough build in throughout today and into Tuesday, you'll notice for the most part, it looks like it's just grazing California here. And then at the very tail end of it, it looks like it almost forms a cutoff low that looks to almost bump into Southern California here. So that's going to be interesting to see if we're getting any precipitation. But throughout the region, you can see it's moving directly through Nevada, Utah, down into Arizona, and New Mexico. So that's where we're getting some of that widespread heavy snowfall. So looking at the precipitation map for the widespread region, you can see as that first storm goes through, there's the low as it moves directly over Southern California. It does look like there's some periods where we're getting some scattered light rain throughout SoCal, although the clear place to look on this map is that widespread snow that's building first into Nevada, where we have those winter weather advisories, and then spreading out into Utah and Arizona as well. And I would say this is actually a pretty good forecast because it's Nevada, Utah, and Arizona that are in the most extreme droughts. So again, it's great to see some of that snowfall building into those regions. Obviously, it would be better if we were getting large amounts of rain and snow in California as well, but we'll take what we can get. So with that second storm, it looks like it's doing the exact same thing. Mostly bringing some snowfall to Nevada, Utah, down here into Arizona, and then there might be some scattered rainfall down here in Southern California. So let's actually just look through at the rainfall. We'll just ignore Nevada, Utah, Arizona at this point because that's mostly going to be snowfall. Right there you can see down here in Southern California, maybe 0.1 to 0.2 inches of rain with some precipitation building into the very northern parts of California as well. Looking at the snowfall, which might be the more important thing to look at here because that looks to be the bigger story associated with the Southwest throughout this week. Again, snowfall over 2 to 5 inches throughout Nevada, Utah, Arizona, with some bullseyes here in Utah and Arizona getting up over 8 inches, possibly even a foot in some places as well. For the most part, California missing out. Looks like the Sierras barely getting any snowfall, if any, with both of these systems, just dodging California. And I don't think I showed it that well earlier. What's really driving this lack of precipitation for California? It's the fact that it's just scraping along, but mostly dodging us right there. And then for the most part, if you look at this map, we're in almost a little ridge right here, which is actually going to turn into a giant ridge as we get into this weekend and then the start of next week. So keep an eye on that, and remember that when I show the extended forecast in a second, where it shows that California is going to be for the most part dry, it's because of that ridge, which is already starting to try and form right now throughout this week, and then really starts to strengthen as we get into this weekend and the start of next week. That is a rather large ridge right there. So that's where we'll expect to see some warm temperatures and some a dry pattern filling in. So just looking at that again, we got that snowfall, especially through Nevada, Utah, Arizona. So that's going to be some good news when it comes to the drought. Right there, you see those are the states that are some of the states in the country that are in the most extreme drought right now. So great to see some of that snowfall building into those locations. Again, it'd be great to also see it building into California, but we will take what we can get. So looking at the exact timing of some of that rain that's going to be building into SoCal, again, this is almost just grasping at straws here because it looks like very light rain and very scattered. But it looks like there is a possibility at about 5 a.m. on Tuesday for some rain, continuing into about 5 p.m. on Tuesday, especially down here in Southern California, getting down all the way into San Diego. With that second system, looks like that could bring some light rain to Los Angeles, all the way down to San Diego as well. And then that appears to be gone by about 11 a.m. on Friday. I believe the bigger part of the story for Southern California goes back to that high wind warning that we were talking about multiple times throughout this video. If we click through here, we can see those high winds come in where we get 30 to 45 mile per hour wind gusts stretching all the way down from the Central Valley all the way down to the Southern California-Mexico border, where we're getting 30 to 45 mile per hour wind gusts. So that might actually be the bigger part of the story, because the rain, we're getting maybe 0.1 to 0.2 inches, but some of these winds are in the extreme range where you're getting up over 40 to 55 miles per hour in some places, and that looks like it's continuing throughout the day Wednesday. One thing I'm going to be following closely is if any of these are dangerous Santa Anas when it comes to the wildfire threat. I'll certainly look into that further. I didn't in this video because we don't have any red flag warnings in place, but I'll keep my eye out to see if any of those become possible wildfire events, because like I said, a large part of this region is still abnormally dry. So I'll keep my eye out for that and let you guys know if I see anything. Now, one area where we do have that wildfire threat is down here in Arizona, but there's also some great snowfall building in there, which we saw on those maps earlier. It looks like some of that snowfall is going to be building in about 6 a.m. on Tuesday, strengthening into 12 p.m. on Tuesday, and then just widespread and even strengthening again as we get into 6 a.m. on Wednesday. And again, that's shared between Arizona and New Mexico. And then some more snow is expected with that second system, although not as much as the first. So just looking at that again, looks like the majority of the snow, 12 p.m. on Tuesday. And then right there, it looks like there's some strong snow building into especially the northeastern part of the state at about 6 a.m. on Wednesday. If we look at the total accumulated snowfall, we'll just click all the way through. You can see widespread areas, especially of the northern and northeastern part of the state. Widespread getting 3 to 5 inches of snow, with some bullseyes getting up 6 to 10 inches, maybe even a foot in some places. What you'll notice though is the southern part of the state remains for the most part dry, which is affecting that wildfire threat and that red flag warning that we have in place in those locations. They're remaining dry. The fuels are already dry. We're in that extreme drought that we were talking about earlier. And then you're mixing all that dry air with some 30 to 45 mile per hour winds. The same winds that first move through Southern California, then eventually move into Arizona at about 12 p.m. Monday, this is something that's going on right now, and then that's going to be continuing into this evening, and then we're going to see some of those winds actually start to pick up throughout Tuesday afternoon into Tuesday evening, where some of these wind gusts get up to 50 to maybe even 55 miles per hour. So that's why we have that wildfire threat down there in Arizona, even though some northern parts of the state are possibly picking up a foot of snow. So it's actually a little surprising we don't have any winter weather advisories up here where we're getting all that snowfall, but where we do have a warning is right where you saw those strongest winds. That's why I only showed the wind aspect of that fire danger, because it almost perfectly matches where we have that wildfire threat. If we go back here, I believe that shows it the best right there, about 40 to 50 mile per hour wind gusts throughout this afternoon, and then also tomorrow afternoon, almost perfectly matching where we have that red flag warning and that critical threat for wildfire. So that's one thing that I'll be following closely. So we talked about a lot throughout this video. It was that flood threat throughout the southeast, working into the Midwest, the winter storm warnings with all that snow building into Colorado, some severe weather building into parts of Oklahoma, Texas. I think the key parts of these stories, of these storms that are coming through, are going to be down here in Louisiana and Mississippi, where there's some locations expecting maybe 6 to 8 inches of rainfall over the next 5 days. The snowfall that's building into Colorado, some locations getting up over 8 inches to possibly even a foot. We've got that wildfire threat down here in Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. And then I think the big story that we're going to be following throughout this week is that second storm coming through that will most likely lead to some flood warnings popping up here in Louisiana and Mississippi. And then we'll have to keep our eye out on what it does when it goes to the Midwest, because that's where we're expecting some severe weather, possibly some thunderstorms, and what we saw were some hurricane force winds. Now, the bad news is California, for the most part, is staying dry throughout this entire week. Possibly some light rain and snow in some locations, but for the most part dry, and that appears to be continuing into the extended forecast as well. So everything we've talked about so far in this video is at most up to 5 days out. I purposely didn't spend the majority of our time more than 5 days out because I guarantee the weather models will change by then. But the Climate Prediction Center actually does a relatively good job of predicting the overall pattern that we can expect in the extended forecast. So while it might not do much good to pinpoint the exact places you're getting snowfall 10 days out, the overall pattern is usually pretty on point. So if we look at this overall pattern, you can see that California, unfortunately, is expected to be dry 6 to 10 days out, which honestly makes sense because we saw that giant ridge that's going to be building in over California. And actually, the first little part of that ridge is already starting and is part of the reason we're not getting any of this precipitation that's widespread throughout much of the rest of the West, with both of those storms that come through. So this is what's going on with the temperature. Where you have that ridge, that's where you get this warmer air. So California is expected to be above average temperatures, while where that trough is digging down, that's where you're pulling down some of that cold air. So much of the west into the central parts of the U.S. expecting to have cooler air as both of those systems back to back bring some of that cold air down, and it looks like it's going to be hanging around 6 to 10 days out. On the eastern half of the country, that's where we have another ridge on that side that looks to be hanging around till we're 6 to 10 days out, having some warm temperatures over there as well. Now, that also explains what's going on with some of our precipitation patterns. Looks like 6 to 10 days out, much of the west, as that massive ridge develops, we're going to be mostly dry air, which again isn't great news when it comes to wildfire and drought in California. But hey, weather forecasts can be wrong, so let's just hope that they are when it comes to that precipitation. When it comes to more precipitation actually filling in, looks like there's a good probability that much of the eastern third of the country will be getting some storms, which makes sense because with that trough building up, it looks like there is an overall pattern that seems to be in place going from Louisiana up into the Midwest. On the right side of that trough, that's where you're going to be building in some moisture from the Gulf of Mexico. So it looks like we're expecting some precipitation for the eastern third of the country 6 to 10 days out. Now, when we look 8 to 14 days out, it looks like the southwest is going to be warmer than average, while down here from Texas into the southeast and the Ohio Valley is expected to be cooler than average, while parts of the northeast and Florida are expected to be warmer than average. Then looking at the precipitation, 8 to 14 days out, it looks like almost the entire country is looking dry 8 to 14 days out, except for the very southern parts of Texas. So while there's multiple systems moving through right now, bringing what looks to be some widespread heavy rain, some heavy snow throughout almost the entire west, some heavy rain, especially stretching from Louisiana to the Midwest, it looks like that pattern is going to change 8 to 14 days out, as it looks like we're going to be shifting to almost dry, no precipitation for the majority of the country. So we'll have to see what ends up happening there. Like I always say, weather forecast models change every day, so we're just going to have to try every day to follow them and see what they're saying. Hopefully this video was helpful, and thank you for watching.